Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Episode. Here again, I got another fun and exciting episode for you guys this evening because recently we talked about the new beat 'em up prototype on the Sega Genesis out of the Vortex, and the same developer that gave that to Hidden Palace also gave a prototype version, more than one actually, of Hard Boiled, an unreleased Sega Saturn game that was a PAL PlayStation 1 exclusive based on a comic book from Frank Miller. So it seems like there's a lot of fun prototypes going around these days, so we are here to talk about them. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But what is Hard Boiled? If you can't tell already, it's a third-person action combat racing game. Kind of feels a little bit like something like Wipeout, mixed with something like Crash and Burn on the 3DO. Now this is not a finished prototype, there's definitely some jank in here, and it's hard to say how much of that jank would have been there if the game saw release versus how much of it's there because it is an unfinished prototype. I will say graphically what you see on screen looks quite nice, even if there really isn't much of a skybox. You basically just get this road in front of you, which is sometimes dirt, sometimes pavement, and some buildings off to the side. The control also is very squirrely on this version of the game, and big thanks to Andy D for sending the capture over. I played it in the background, and I will definitely say that there's something going on here that just makes it feel like this is not a finished control system. A lot of the models look great, a lot of the effects are good, but it feels like maybe this is like a 70% done prototype version of the game, which is still a ton of fun to check out though, and I definitely recommend you do so. You can play this on real Sega Saturn hardware, on software emulation, on MiSTer FPGA, however you want to play it, you can check it out. And some of the ideas here are quite good. I love the power-ups, I love the branching pathways, I love the overall combat of the game, as well as some of the obstructions of that crane falling into the road there, things you need to worry about. And in some ways I get slight Carmageddon vibes here, just based on the models, not so much the gameplay, but you tell me down below what this game reminds you of the most. It almost feels like it could be a racing game, but they went with that pure combat, and again, it is based on a comic book I've never read before, so if you know much about Hard Boiled, tell me down below what this kind of reminds you of, because I do a little research, but I am just not really a comic book enthusiast. You will see there at some points in time the car can fall through the road when it's transitioning, so a lot of those transitions definitely aren't complete yet. You kind of have a little bit of phasing through the geometry within the level. And you'll see here once that car gets on its side, it can be quite difficult to kind of lift it back onto the course, and you can go up and down in the game as well in a hover car sort of scenario. So it's going to take you a few minutes to get used to the controls and to try to feel more comfortable with the game, but even then, it never really feels like you're 100% in control of the vehicle itself. It's almost like it has a mind of its own, and you're definitely going to die a decent amount of the time. But I love this first person view as well. Kind of gives you a little bit of Descent vibe going too. You'll see here you do get a full title screen as well as an options menu. Not sure how many of those options are hard-coded into the game though, how many are actually articulatable and how many are not really kind of wired up. But I do love the title menu. You get a lot of fun different graphical effects, so you can tell the developers of this game when they were porting it to Saturn were doing everything they could to make it great. And the reality is there is a version of this game out there for PlayStation 1 that is complete, so if you want to play Hard Boiled and know exactly what it was supposed to be on Sega Saturn, you do have that version. But it's always fun to celebrate new prototypes coming to Sega Saturn, and I will say graphically and performance wise this is running quite well. When you hit that boost and the screen speeds up, you're getting a good frame rate out of the Sega Saturn and the 3D hardware on board. So Hard Boiled is a good technical showcase of what the Saturn could accomplish in talented developers' hands. Even though this is not finished, it is running quite well as far as the performance is concerned. Now you do get music in the game, but it doesn't really seem to have much of any sound effect whatsoever, so I'm going to let you listen to the soundtrack for just a bit. We're going to come back, take a look at a different level, and kind of talk about the overall impressions of Hard Boiled and whether or not you should play them. But honestly, a new prototype everyone should play, so we can kind of answer that off the top, but we'll come back with more footage after you listen to the soundtrack, which does definitely fit the game theme. You can see there in the large open areas when those big mechs come down the canyon, the game can definitely slow down, but that's not really surprising for both a prototype and a 3D game of this generation on the Sega Saturn. But the music definitely works, it is a vibe, and it gives you that futuristic feel. In some ways, this game also reminds me of Blade Force on the 3DO, both graphically as well as the overall setting of what you're seeing on screen, and that's definitely not a bad game to be compared to, because Blade Force on the 3DO was one of those games that showed the hardware could keep up with PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn when it was in the best developers' hands for 3DO. And that's just the fun thing about taking a look at prototypes. You get a sense of a game that you never actually saw on store shelves back in the day, and so many people love these things. Just don't go into Hardboiled expecting a full game experience. Just all the levels are here. Yes, you can play the game, but it's not going to be perfect, and it's more going to be a curiosity to see a quote-unquote new game for Sega Saturn than it is finding your favorite new Sega Saturn game of all time. And again, if you want to know exactly what Hardboiled was, you have the PlayStation 1 version to play as well. And I'm assuming we must be underwater in this area because you start seeing these air bubbles come up, but because we can't really see what's going on, I think I'm wrong on that. Tell me down below what you think, where those bubbles are coming from, because we have nuclear smokestacks here, and it kind of just confuses me. But you will see that we're collecting these different nuclear waste signs. We're basically trying to collect nukes in the game, but they are just laid up as logos, which kind of just makes it seem like you're picking up a power-up and not an actual nuclear warhead. They just sort of put a little bit of a polygon or two in there to make it look like a nuke or even just a bomb sitting on the screen. But honestly, what can you do? We kind of take what we get here. And you do have the ability to play around with the controls, and you might want to dial in exactly what works for you, because again, it's going to take a little bit of brain training and hand training to 100% understand how to make this game function on the control scheme. Once you pick up what the game's asking of you, it becomes second nature, but it's going to take a couple minutes to get there. As we move on to the next stage of the docks here, again, I love the 3D in this game. It looks pretty. It's got that classic pixelated look that Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 were known for. If you grew up in this era of games, this is the type of 3D that you 100% have nostalgia for. If you did not grow up in this era and you started playing games on Dreamcast or PlayStation 2, it's definitely going to look a lot more aged and antiquated, but I feel like the majority of my audience was definitely playing PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn when it was new on store shelves, so for you this should just be second nature. And you will see pretty much everything in the game is made up of polygons versus being 2D sprites, and in some way this feels like a grimier, more 3D version of one of Taito's superscalers that you saw back in arcades. Night Striker is an absolutely classic game, and this definitely has a tinge of that vibe as well. And that's the fun thing about Hardboiled. It reminds me of 5 or 6 games that I absolutely love, and I do enjoy playing this and checking it out. It is not a perfect game, it is not a finished game, and it's definitely a game, if it had come out on Sega Saturn, probably would have reviewed in the high 70s to low 80s, but it would have been a game that people would have remembered and enjoyed playing back then. And the best thing is you get to play it today, because one of the developers released this, The Hidden Palace, and they made it playable for everyone. And that's the type of stuff, if you watch my channel, you know I always advocate for the free and open sharing of rare prototype and unreleased games so people can have fun with them, even if they're not the most famous games around, even if they're not perfect games. Hardboiled on Sega Saturn is so fun to check out to see what could have been had this game actually saw release. But of course, you know you're watching the video, the game never came out, so it's just something that you get the prototype for. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you ever heard of this game before, and have you ever played it on PlayStation 1? I feel like for the most part, if you have, you're probably in Europe somewhere where a decent amount of my viewership is. But if you have spare time this week, download Hardboiled, throw it on a Saturn, an emulator, or MiSTer FPGA, check it out, have some fun, and see what could have been. Short of that, we are done, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.